Maya Johnson had been working as a maid for the Wellington family for 3 years. Every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, she would arrive at the massive iron gates of their Beverly Hills mansion. The house stood like a fortress behind perfectly trimmed hedges, its white columns reaching toward the sky like something from a movie set. Maya would walk through the servants' entrance, tie her hair back neatly, and begin another day of cleaning the 30-room mansion. The Wellington family was known throughout California for their wealth. Richard Wellington had made his billions in tech companies, buying and selling them like toys. His wife, Patricia, spent her days at charity lunches and spa appointments. Their twin daughters, both in college, rarely came home except for holidays. Maya knew their schedules better than they did. She knew that Richard liked his coffee black and burning hot, that Patricia preferred her morning tea with exactly 1 sugar cube, and that the girls always left their rooms like tornadoes had swept through them. Maya was 32 years old and had been cleaning houses since she was 18. She had dreams once of becoming a teacher, but life had other plans. Her mother got sick. Her younger brother needed help with school, and the bills kept piling up like autumn leaves. Cleaning work paid well enough, and the Wellington family paid better than most. They gave her health insurance, 2 weeks off each year, and even helped her brother get into a good high school. Maya was grateful for the job, even if it meant scrubbing toilets and dusting furniture that cost more than most people's cars. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in October. Maya arrived at her usual time and noticed something different. Richard Wellington was still home. Usually he left for his office before 7, but today he was pacing around the kitchen in his expensive suit, talking loudly on his phone. His face was red with anger, and he kept running his hands through his gray hair. Maya tried to stay out of his way, quietly preparing his coffee and setting it on the marble counter. Richard was shouting into his phone about some business deal that had gone wrong. Maya caught bits and pieces as she worked. Something about losing millions of dollars, something about lawyers and investigations. She kept her head down and continued wiping the counters, but she could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. When Richard finally hung up the phone, he slammed it down so hard that Maya jumped. That evening, as Maya was finishing her work, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Richard was in his study with 2 men in expensive suits. Maya was dusting the hallway outside when she heard them talking about money being moved to secret bank accounts. They mentioned names of companies she had never heard of, and they talked about hiding money from the government. Maya's hands trembled as she held her cleaning cloth. She knew she was hearing something she should not be hearing. One of the men suggested they needed to be more careful about who was around when they talked business. Richard laughed and said the help was invisible, that people like Maya were too stupid to understand anything important anyway. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she kept working. She had learned long ago that rich people often talked about their employees like they were furniture. The next few weeks passed normally, but Maya noticed more strange meetings in Richard's study. Men in dark suits would arrive late at night, and they would talk in whispers behind closed doors. Maya tried to avoid cleaning near the study during these meetings, but sometimes she had no choice. The house was large, and every room needed attention. Maya lived in a small apartment 20 minutes away from the Wellington mansion. She shared it with her brother Marcus, who was now 19 and in his 2nd year of college. Marcus was studying business and economics, and he was much smarter than Maya had ever been in school. In the evenings, they would sit at their tiny kitchen table, while Marcus did his homework and Maya prepared dinner. Sometimes Maya would tell him about her day, but she was always careful not to share too much about the Wellington family's private business. One evening, Marcus noticed that Maya seemed worried about something. He asked her what was wrong, but Maya just shook her head and said it was nothing. She could not stop thinking about the conversations she had overheard. Part of her wanted to forget about it and mind her own business, but another part of her felt like she knew something important. She had heard enough crime shows to know that hiding money from the government was illegal. Maya had always believed in doing the right thing. Her mother had raised her to be honest and fair, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. But Maya also knew that she was just a maid, and the Wellingtons were powerful people with expensive lawyers and important connections. Who would believe her word against theirs? Who would even care what a house cleaner had to say about billion-dollar business deals? The weather was getting colder, and Maya found herself working longer hours as the Wellington family prepared for their annual Halloween party. The house would be filled with hundreds of wealthy guests, and everything had to be perfect. Maya spent days polishing silver, arranging flowers, and making sure every surface gleamed. She took pride in her work, even when no one noticed her efforts. As Maya worked, she continued to overhear pieces of conversations that troubled her. Richard and his business partners seemed to be moving large amounts of money to places where the government could not find it. They talked about fake companies and false documents. Maya began to realize that she was witnessing something much bigger and more serious than she had first thought. The weight of this knowledge sat heavy on her shoulders like a stone. Maya had always been invisible in the Wellington house, just as Richard had said. She could move through the rooms like a ghost, cleaning and organizing while the family lived their lives around her. But now being invisible felt different. Now it felt like she was carrying a secret that could change everything. She went to bed each night wondering what she should do with what she knew. And she woke up each morning hoping that today would be just another normal day of cleaning and staying out of trouble. But Maya was about to learn that some secrets are too big to stay hidden, and that sometimes being invisible can be the most powerful thing of all. The Halloween party was the biggest event the Wellington family hosted each year. Maya had worked through 5 of these parties since she started working for the family, and each one was more elaborate than the last. This year, Patricia Wellington had hired a team of decorators who transformed the mansion into a haunted palace. Fake spider webs draped from crystal chandeliers, carved pumpkins lined every hallway, and actors dressed as ghosts and zombies would wander through the rooms to entertain the guests. Maya worked 18-hour days leading up to the party. Her back ached from scrubbing floors, her hands were raw from polishing silver, and her feet were swollen from standing for so long. But the extra money would help pay for Marcus's textbooks next semester. So she pushed through the exhaustion. The Wellington family paid their staff overtime for special events, and Maya needed every dollar she could earn. 2 days before the party, Maya was cleaning Richard's study when she made a discovery that changed everything. She was dusting his massive wooden desk when she accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. As she bent down to pick them up, she saw names and numbers that made her heart race. Bank account numbers, company names, and dollar amounts that had so many zeros she had to count them twice. Maya quickly gathered the papers and put them back exactly as they had been, but the images were burned into her memory. That night, Maya could not sleep. She lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she had seen. The numbers on those papers represented more money than Maya could imagine. Money that was being hidden from the government. Money that should have been used for taxes that could build schools and hospitals. Maya thought about her brother's school, which needed new computers and books. She thought about her mother, who had died because she could not afford the best medical care. The unfairness of it all made Maya's stomach turn. Marcus noticed that his sister was acting strangely. He found her sitting at their kitchen table at 3 a.m, staring into a cup of cold tea. When he asked her what was wrong, Maya just shook her head and said she had too much work to think about. Marcus was smart enough to know that something was bothering her, but he did not push for answers. He trusted that Maya would tell him when she was ready. The day of the Halloween party arrived with gray skies and cold wind. Maya arrived at the Wellington mansion before sunrise to help with the final preparations. The house was buzzing with activity as caterers set up food stations, bartenders arranged bottles of expensive liquor, and musicians tuned their instruments in the grand ballroom. Maya moved through the chaos like a shadow, making sure every detail was perfect. By evening, the mansion was transformed into something magical and terrifying. Hundreds of wealthy guests arrived in elaborate costumes. Maya saw politicians she recognized from television, movie stars she had watched in films, and business leaders whose faces appeared on magazine covers. They laughed and danced and drank wine that cost more per bottle than Maya made in a week. Maya and the other staff members were dressed in simple black uniforms, serving drinks and cleaning up messes as the party grew wilder. Around midnight, Maya was in the kitchen washing dishes when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Richard Wellington was standing near the back door with 3 men she had never seen before. They were not wearing costumes like the other guests, and they looked serious and dangerous. Richard was handing one of them a thick envelope, and Maya heard him say something about making problems disappear. One of the strange men noticed Maya washing dishes and said something to Richard. Richard glanced over at Maya, and for a moment their eyes met. Maya quickly looked away and focused on the dishes. But she could feel Richard watching her. Her hands shook as she scrubbed a plate, and she hoped he had not seen the fear in her eyes. The party continued until almost 4 in the morning. Maya and the other staff worked until dawn, cleaning up the mess left behind by the wealthy guests. Broken glass, spilled wine, and food scattered across expensive rugs kept them busy for hours. Maya was exhausted, but she was also relieved that the party was over and she could go home to think about everything she had witnessed. As Maya was gathering her things to leave, Patricia Wellington approached her. Patricia was still wearing her elaborate queen costume, though her crown was crooked and her makeup was smeared. She thanked Maya for her hard work and handed her an envelope with her bonus payment. Patricia seemed genuinely grateful, and for a moment, Maya felt guilty about what she was thinking of doing. Walking to her car in the early morning light, Maya felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She knew things about the Wellington family that could destroy them, but she also knew that speaking up could destroy her own life as well. Rich people like the Wellingtons had ways of making problems disappear, just like Richard had said to those dangerous-looking men. Maya drove home through empty streets, thinking about her choices. She could pretend she had never seen or heard anything, and continued living her quiet life as a maid. She could keep earning her steady paycheck and helping her brother through college, or she could risk everything to do what she believed was right. Maya had always been taught that good people stand up against wrongdoing, but she had never imagined that doing the right thing could be so dangerous. When Maya arrived at her apartment, Marcus was asleep on the couch with his textbooks scattered around him. He had been studying late into the night, working toward his dream of becoming a successful businessman. Maya looked at her brother and thought about the future she wanted for him. She wanted him to succeed honestly, to build something good and meaningful with his life. How could she teach him to be a good man if she was willing to stay silent about the bad things she had witnessed? Maya made herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table as the sun rose outside her window. She pulled out a piece of paper and began writing down everything she could remember from the past few weeks. Names, dates, numbers, and conversations that she had overheard. She wrote for 2 hours, filling several pages with information that could change everything. As she wrote, Maya realized that she had already made her decision. She could not continue to clean the house of people who were stealing money that belonged to everyone. She could not serve coffee to a man who made threats about making problems disappear. She could not pretend to be invisible while witnessing crimes that hurt innocent people. Maya folded the papers carefully and put them in an envelope. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what to do with this information. She would have to find someone who would listen to her and take her seriously. She would have to be brave in a way she had never been brave before. But first, she needed to get some sleep and prepare herself for what would surely be the most difficult day of her life. Maya woke up after only 3 hours of sleep, but her mind was clear and determined. She had made her decision and now she needed to act on it. After making breakfast for Marcus, who was rushing to get to his morning classes, Maya sat down at her computer and began researching. She needed to find the right person to contact, someone who would take her seriously and protect her from the powerful Wellington family. Maya spent the morning reading about whistleblower protection laws and government agencies that investigated financial crimes. The more she read, the more she realized how dangerous her situation was. People who exposed wealthy criminals sometimes faced serious consequences. They lost their jobs, received death threats, and some even disappeared completely. But Maya also read stories about brave people who had risked everything to expose the truth, and how their courage had led to justice for many victims. After several hours of research, Maya decided to contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She found the phone number for the local field office and stared at it for a long time, before finally dialing. Her heart pounded as the phone rang, and when a professional voice answered, Maya almost hung up. Instead, she took a deep breath and asked to speak to someone about financial crimes. The FBI agent who took Maya's call was named Sarah Chen. Agent Chen listened carefully as Maya explained what she had witnessed at the Wellington mansion. Maya was nervous and stumbled over her words at first, but Agent Chen was patient and encouraging. She asked Maya detailed questions about dates, times, and exactly what she had seen and heard. By the end of the hour-long conversation, Agent Chen had convinced Maya to meet in person the next day. That evening, Maya could barely concentrate on her usual tasks around the apartment. Marcus noticed that she was distracted and asked again if something was wrong. This time, Maya decided to tell her brother the truth. She sat him down at their small kitchen table and explained everything she had witnessed at the Wellington house. Marcus listened with wide eyes, and when Maya finished her story, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, Marcus spoke. He told Maya that he was proud of her for wanting to do the right thing, but he was also scared for her safety. He had studied enough about business and economics to understand how powerful people protected themselves from threats. He begged Maya to be careful and to consider what might happen to both of them if the Wellingtons discovered what she was planning. Maya appreciated her brother's concern, but she had already made up her mind. She explained to Marcus that some things were more important than personal safety. Their mother had always taught them to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Maya could not live with herself knowing that she had stayed silent while witnessing serious crimes. The next morning, Maya called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Patricia Wellington sounded concerned on the phone and offered to send their family doctor to check on Maya. Maya declined politely and promised to return to work as soon as she felt better. The kindness in Patricia's voice made Maya feel even more conflicted about what she was about to do. Maya met Agent Chen at a small coffee shop downtown, far away from the wealthy neighborhoods where the Wellingtons lived. Agent Chen was a serious woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put Maya at ease. Maya brought the envelope containing all the information she had written down, and Agent Chen reviewed it carefully while they talked. Agent Chen explained that the FBI had been investigating Richard Wellington's business dealings for several months, but they had been unable to gather enough evidence to build a strong case. Maya's testimony and the information she had overheard could be exactly what they needed to move forward with their investigation. However, Agent Chen warned Maya that becoming a witness in a federal investigation would change her life forever. Maya asked about witness protection and what would happen to her job. Agent Chen explained that the FBI could provide some protection, but Maya would likely have to find new employment. The Wellingtons would certainly fire her once they learned about her cooperation with the investigation, and they might make it difficult for her to find work with other wealthy families. Maya would also have to testify in court if the case went to trial, which meant facing Richard Wellington and his expensive lawyers in front of a judge and jury. Despite the risks, Maya agreed to cooperate with the FBI investigation. Agent Chen gave her a special phone number to call if she felt threatened, and they arranged to meet again in a few days. Agent Chen also warned Maya to be extra careful at work and to avoid any situations where she might be alone with Richard Wellington. Maya left the coffee shop feeling both terrified and relieved. She had finally done something about the injustice she had witnessed. Maya returned to work the next day, trying to act normal while feeling like everyone could see her secret written on her face. Richard Wellington was traveling on business, which made Maya feel slightly safer. But Patricia was home and seemed to be watching Maya more closely than usual. During lunch, Patricia asked Maya if she was feeling better and if there was anything troubling her. Maya assured her that she was fine and just needed rest. Over the next few weeks, Maya continued her regular work routine while secretly meeting with FBI agents and providing them with additional information. The agents were building a comprehensive case against Richard Wellington and several of his business partners. Maya learned that the investigation involved not just tax evasion, but also money laundering, fraud, and connections to organized crime. The scope of the crimes was much larger than Maya had imagined. Maya began to notice small changes in the Wellington household. Richard seemed more paranoid and angry than usual. He had hushed conversations on his phone and met with his lawyers more frequently. Patricia seemed stressed and worried, though she tried to maintain her usual cheerful demeanor with the staff. Maya wondered if the family suspected that they were being investigated. One evening, as Maya was preparing to leave work, she overheard Richard on the phone with someone discussing the need to clean house and eliminate loose ends. Maya's blood turned to ice as she realized he might be talking about getting rid of anyone who knew too much about his illegal activities. Maya quickly finished her work and left the mansion, her hands shaking as she drove home. That night, Maya called Agent Chen and reported what she had heard. Agent Chen assured Maya that the FBI was monitoring Richard Wellington closely and that Maya was as safe as they could make her. However, Agent Chen also advised Maya to be extra vigilant and to vary her routines so she would be harder to follow or predict. Maya lay awake that night thinking about her mother, who had always told her that doing the right thing was rarely easy but always necessary. Maya thought about all the people who had been hurt by Richard Wellington's crimes. People who had lost money from their pension funds that had been stolen, schools that could not buy supplies because tax money had been hidden away, hospitals that could not afford equipment because wealthy people refused to pay their fair share. Maya knew that the next few months would be the most difficult of her life, but she also knew that she was doing something important. She was standing up for people who had no voice, fighting against a system that allowed the wealthy to break the law without consequences. Maya was no longer just an invisible maid cleaning a rich family's house. She was a witness for justice, and that made all the risk worthwhile. 3 weeks after Maya began working with the FBI, everything changed in a single moment that would haunt her dreams for years to come. It was a cold Thursday morning in November, and Maya arrived at the Wellington mansion to find an unusual number of expensive cars parked in the circular driveway. Through the tall windows, she could see men in dark suits moving around the house with the urgency of people dealing with a crisis. Maya entered through the servants' entrance as always, but immediately sensed that something was very wrong. The usual calm atmosphere of the house had been replaced by tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. Patricia Wellington was nowhere to be seen, which was strange because she was always in the kitchen having her morning tea when Maya arrived. Instead, Maya found Richard Wellington standing in the center of the grand foyer, his face red with fury as he barked orders at the men around him. Maya tried to slip past unnoticed and begin her work, but Richard's voice stopped her cold. He called her name in a tone she had never heard before, sharp and dangerous like a knife cutting through the air. Maya turned slowly to face him, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Richard's eyes were bloodshot and wild, and Maya realized that he looked like a man who had not slept in days. Richard demanded to know where Maya had been the previous afternoon when she had left work early for what she claimed was a doctor's appointment. Maya had actually been meeting with Agent Chen to review her upcoming testimony, but she stuck to her cover story about seeing a dentist. Richard studied her face with the intensity of a predator examining prey, and Maya fought to keep her expression neutral and innocent. One of the men in suits whispered something in Richard's ear, and Maya saw Richard's face grow even darker. He dismissed the other men with a wave of his hand and waited until they had left the room before approaching Maya. He stopped just inches from her face, close enough that she could smell the alcohol on his breath and see the rage burning in his eyes. Maya's body tensed as every instinct told her to run, but her feet felt frozen to the marble floor. Richard began speaking in a low, menacing voice that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. He told Maya that he knew she had been asking questions about his business, that he knew she had been snooping around his private papers. Maya's mouth went dry as she realized that somehow Richard had discovered her cooperation with the FBI investigation. She tried to deny his accusations, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Richard grabbed Maya by the shoulders and shook her, demanding to know who she had been talking to and what she had told them. Maya insisted that she did not know what he was talking about, that she was just a maid who minded her own business. Richard's grip tightened painfully on her arms, and Maya realized that the kind, polite employer she had known for 3 years had been replaced by someone capable of real violence. When Maya continued to deny knowing anything about his business affairs, Richard's control snapped completely. He grabbed a handful of Maya's hair and began dragging her across the marble floor toward his study. Maya cried out in pain and fear, her hands clawing at Richard's grip as her scalp burned with each step. She begged him to let her go, promising that she would quit her job and never speak about the Wellington family to anyone. Richard threw Maya into a leather chair in his study and locked the door behind them. Maya's hair was disheveled, her uniform was torn, and tears of pain and terror streamed down her face. Richard stood over her like a giant, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair hanging loose around his face. Maya had never been more afraid in her entire life. Richard began pacing back and forth in front of Maya, ranting about betrayal and loyalty, and the price of crossing powerful people. He told Maya that he had built his empire by eliminating anyone who threatened him, and that he would not hesitate to make her disappear if she did not cooperate. Maya's whole body was shaking now, but she tried to focus on what Agent Chen had taught her about staying calm in dangerous situations. Richard pulled out his phone and showed Maya photographs that made her blood turn to ice. They were pictures of her apartment building, her car, and Marcus walking to his college classes. Richard explained in graphic detail what would happen to Maya and her brother if she continued to work against him. Maya realized that Richard had been watching her for days, possibly weeks, and that he knew exactly how to hurt her most effectively. The threats against Marcus broke something inside Maya's chest, but they also awakened a fierce protectiveness she had never felt before. Maya looked up at Richard Wellington, this billionaire who thought he could terrorize and control people just because he had money and power. She thought about her mother, who had taught her to stand up to bullies no matter how big they were. She thought about Marcus, who was working so hard to build an honest life for himself. She thought about all the people who had been hurt by Richard's crimes. Maya wiped the tears from her face and stood up from the chair, even though her legs were still trembling. She looked Richard Wellington directly in the eyes, this man who had just dragged her across the floor by her hair and threatened to kill her and her brother. Maya took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that was quiet but steady, a voice that carried the weight of 3 generations of strong women who had refused to be broken by powerful men. Maya spoke just one word, but it was a word that carried the force of absolute defiance and unshakable determination. It was a word that told Richard Wellington that all his money and power and threats could not make her betray her principles or abandon her duty to justice. It was a word that would echo through courtrooms and newspaper headlines and change the lives of everyone involved in this story. The word Maya spoke was simple and clear and final. She looked at the billionaire who had just assaulted her and threatened her family, and she said the one word that would bring his empire crashing down around him. In that moment, Maya Johnson transformed from a frightened maid into something much more powerful. She became a woman who would not be silenced, intimidated, or bought. She became a witness who would speak truth to power no matter what it cost her. Richard Wellington stared at Maya in shock, unable to believe that this woman he had considered beneath his notice had just defied him so completely. He realized in that moment that he had made a terrible mistake, that his rage and desperation had led him to reveal his true nature to the one person who could destroy him. The word Maya had spoken hung in the air between them like a sword, and Richard knew that there was no taking back what had just happened in his study. The word Maya had spoken was recorded. She pulled her phone from her uniform pocket and held it up so Richard could see the recording app that had been running throughout their entire confrontation. Agent Chen had given Maya specific instructions to document any threats or violence from Richard Wellington, and Maya had been recording their conversation from the moment he grabbed her shoulders. Richard Wellington's face went completely white as he stared at the phone in Maya's hands. In that small device was evidence of assault, threats, and admissions that would destroy him in any courtroom. His entire body began to shake as he realized that his moment of rage had just handed the FBI everything they needed to put him in prison for the rest of his life. Maya stepped backward toward the door, still holding her phone up like a shield. She told Richard that the recording was already being uploaded to a secure server, and that Agent Chen would receive it within minutes. Richard lunged toward Maya, desperately trying to grab the phone, but Maya was quicker. She unlocked the study door and ran toward the main entrance of the house, with Richard stumbling behind her, begging her to stop and delete the recording. Maya burst through the front door of the Wellington mansion and ran toward her car, her heart pounding and her hands shaking so badly she could barely get her keys out. Richard followed her outside, no longer caring that neighbors might see him chasing his maid across the lawn. He offered Maya money, promising her millions of dollars if she would just give him the phone and forget everything that had happened. Maya reached her car and locked herself inside, immediately calling the emergency number Agent Chen had given her. Within seconds, Agent Chen answered, and Maya gasped out what had just happened. Agent Chen told Maya to drive directly to the FBI field office and to stay on the phone until she arrived safely. As Maya started her car, she could see Richard Wellington standing in his driveway, looking like a broken man who had just watched his entire world collapse. Maya drove through the city with her hands gripping the steering wheel, constantly checking her rearview mirror to make sure she was not being followed. Agent Chen stayed on the phone with her, providing calm reassurance and giving Maya turn-by-turn directions to ensure she took the safest route to the FBI office. When Maya finally pulled into the secure parking garage at the federal building, she broke down crying from relief and exhaustion. Agent Chen met Maya at her car with a team of other agents and immediately began documenting Maya's injuries. The painful grip marks on her shoulders were photographed, and Maya gave a detailed statement about everything that had happened in Richard's study. The recording from Maya's phone was immediately secured as evidence, and Maya listened to her own voice as FBI technicians enhanced the audio quality. Hearing the recording played back in the sterile FBI conference room made Maya realize just how close she had come to serious harm. Richard's threats were even more chilling when heard a second time, and Maya shuddered as she remembered the wild look in his eyes. Agent Chen assured Maya that she had done everything perfectly, and that her courage had just provided them with the final piece of evidence they needed to arrest Richard Wellington. Within hours of Maya's arrival at the FBI office, federal agents were executing search warrants at the Wellington mansion, Richard's office building, and several other properties connected to his business empire. Maya watched the news coverage from the safety of the FBI office, seeing her former workplace swarmed with investigators carrying boxes of documents and computer equipment. Patricia Wellington was shown being led away from the house by agents. Looking confused and frightened, Agent Chen explained to Maya that she would need to remain in protective custody until Richard Wellington was arrested and secured. The FBI had safe houses where witnesses could stay until it was safe for them to return to their normal lives. But Agent Chen warned Maya that normal might never be the same again. Maya's cooperation with the investigation would become public knowledge once the case went to trial, and there was no going back to her quiet life as a maid. Maya called Marcus from the FBI office to tell him what had happened and that she was safe. Marcus had seen the news reports about the raid on the Wellington mansion and had been frantically trying to reach his sister. When Maya explained that she would be staying in a safe house for an unknown period of time, Marcus insisted on taking time off from school to be with her. Agent Chen arranged for Marcus to be brought to the same secure location as Maya. That evening, Maya sat in a small but comfortable apartment provided by the FBI, finally able to process everything that had happened. Her shoulders still ached where Richard had grabbed her, and her scalp was tender from being dragged by her hair. But Maya felt something she had never expected to feel after such a traumatic experience. She felt proud of herself for having the courage to stand up to Richard Wellington when he tried to intimidate her. Marcus arrived at the safe house after midnight, and Maya had never been happier to see her brother. They sat together on the couch talking until sunrise, with Marcus listening in amazement as Maya told him every detail of her confrontation with Richard Wellington. Marcus told his sister that she was the bravest person he had ever known, and that their mother would have been incredibly proud of her. Courage the next morning brought news that Richard Wellington had been arrested at Los Angeles International Airport while trying to board a private jet to a country that did not have an extradition treaty with the United States. The FBI had moved quickly to prevent his escape, and Richard was now sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting arraignment. The charges against him included tax evasion, money laundering, fraud, assault, and witness intimidation. Maya watched Richard's arrest on the news, seeing him led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about his crimes. The man who had terrorized her just 24 hours earlier now looked small and defeated, no longer the powerful billionaire who thought he was above the law. Maya felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her courage had helped bring this moment about. Agent Chen visited Maya at the safe house to update her on the investigation and prepare her for what would happen next. The evidence against Richard Wellington was overwhelming, thanks in large part to Maya's recorded conversation and her detailed testimony about his illegal activities. However, Agent Chen warned Maya that Richard's lawyers would try to attack her credibility and portray her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge against her former boss. Maya asked Agent Chen what would happen to Patricia, Wellington, and the twin daughters, who had seemed unaware of Richard's crimes. Agent Chen explained that the investigation was ongoing, but it appeared that Patricia and the girls had not been involved in the illegal activities. They would lose most of their wealth when Richard's assets were seized by the government, but they would not face criminal charges. Maya felt mixed emotions about the fate of the Wellington women. Patricia had always been kind to her, and Maya had felt genuine affection for her employer despite everything that had happened. But Maya also knew that the family's comfortable lifestyle had been built on stolen money, and that justice required them to lose the wealth that had been obtained through criminal means. As Maya prepared for the long legal battle ahead, she thought about the words she had spoken to Richard Wellington in his study. Recorded had been more than just a revelation about the evidence against him. It had been Maya's declaration that his crimes would not remain hidden, that his victims would have a voice, and that even a billionaire could not escape justice when confronted by the truth. 6 months after Richard Wellington's arrest, Maya Johnson found herself sitting in a federal courthouse wearing her best dress and feeling more nervous than she had ever felt in her life. Today was the day she would testify against her former employer in front of a jury, lawyers, reporters, and Richard Wellington himself. Maya had spent weeks preparing for this moment with Agent Chen and the federal prosecutors, but no amount of preparation could completely calm her racing heart. The courtroom was packed with people Maya had only seen on television. Reporters filled several rows, their notebooks and cameras ready to document every word of the trial. Richard Wellington's family sat in the front row behind the defense table, with Patricia looking thin and tired, her usual elegant appearance replaced by the strain of months of legal battles and public humiliation. The twin daughters flanked their mother, both home from college to support their father despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Maya sat in the witness waiting room until her name was called, reviewing her testimony one final time with prosecutor Janet Morrison. Ms. Morrison was a sharp, experienced lawyer who had built her career prosecuting white-collar criminals. She had explained to Maya that this case was one of the largest financial fraud prosecutions in California history, with Richard Wellington accused of hiding over $2 billion from the government through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. When Maya was finally called to testify, she walked into the courtroom on unsteady legs, acutely aware that dozens of eyes were watching her every move. She had been featured in newspaper articles and television news stories as the brave whistleblower who had exposed Richard Wellington's crimes. But seeing all these people in person made the magnitude of the situation feel overwhelming. Maya took her oath to tell the truth and sat down in the witness chair, looking out at a sea of faces that included some of the most powerful people in California. Ms. Morrison began Maya's testimony by establishing her background and her employment with the Wellington family. Maya spoke clearly about her 3 years of service as a maid, describing her daily routines and her access to different areas of the mansion. She testified about overhearing conversations between Richard and his business associates, carefully recounting the dates, times, and specific details of what she had witnessed. Maya's voice grew stronger as she spoke, her initial nervousness replaced by determination to tell her story, completely and honestly. The most difficult part of Maya's testimony came when Ms. Morrison asked her to describe the confrontation in Richard's study. Maya looked directly at Richard Wellington as she recounted how he had grabbed her, threatened her family, and dragged her across the floor by her hair. Richard avoided eye contact, staring down at the defense table while Maya's words filled the silent courtroom. Maya's voice remained steady as she described her fear and pain, but tears ran down her cheeks as she remembered Marcus's face when she told him about the threats against his life. Ms. Morrison played the recording Maya had made during her confrontation with Richard, and the courtroom listened in stunned silence to Richard's voice making explicit threats and admitting to crimes. The quality was crystal clear, and every word was audible as Richard Wellington incriminated himself in his own voice. Maya watched the jury's faces as they listened to the recording, seeing shock and disgust in their expressions as they heard a billionaire threaten to make a maid and her college student brother disappear. When it was time for cross-examination, Richard's defense attorney, Harold Blackwood, approached Maya with the polished aggression of a man who charged $1,000 an hour. Mr. Blackwood was famous for defending wealthy clients, and Maya had been warned that he would try to destroy her credibility by any means necessary. He began by suggesting that Maya had been motivated by jealousy and greed, that she had stolen documents and invaded her employer's privacy because she resented the Wellington family's wealth. Maya answered each of Mr. Blackwood's accusations with calm dignity, never raising her voice or becoming defensive. She acknowledged that she had listened to conversations she was not meant to hear, but she explained that it was impossible to avoid overhearing illegal activities when they were being discussed openly in the house where she worked. When Mr. Blackwood suggested that Maya had fabricated her story to get revenge on Richard for firing her, Maya pointed out that she had never been fired and had voluntarily resigned after Richard assaulted her. Mr. Blackwood's most aggressive attack came when he accused Maya of setting up the confrontation with Richard, claiming that she had deliberately provoked him and then recorded his response to create evidence against him. Maya looked the expensive lawyer directly in the eyes and told him that No amount of provocation could justify a grown man dragging a woman across the floor by her hair and threatening to kill her and her brother. The simplicity and power of Maya's response seemed to deflate Mr. Blackwood's argument, and several jury members nodded in agreement with her statement. The cross-examination lasted for 2 grueling days, with Mr. Blackwood questioning every detail of Maya's story and suggesting alternative explanations for everything she had witnessed. Maya never wavered in her testimony, consistently telling the same story she had told to Agent Chen months earlier. Her honesty and consistency were obvious to everyone in the courtroom, and by the time Mr. Blackwood finished his questions, it was clear that he had failed to damage Maya's credibility. After Maya's testimony was complete, she remained in the courthouse to watch the rest of the trial. Other FBI agents testified about the investigation. Financial experts explained how Richard's money laundering schemes had worked, and former business associates who had agreed to cooperate with the government described Richard's criminal activities in detail. The evidence against Richard Wellington was so overwhelming that even his own lawyers seemed to be going through the motions rather than mounting a serious defense. Maya was particularly moved by the testimony of victims who had been hurt by Richard's crimes. Elderly people whose pension funds had been stolen spoke about losing their life savings and being unable to afford medical care or housing. Teachers described schools that could not buy textbooks or computers because wealthy people like Richard refused to pay taxes that funded education. Hospital administrators explained how reduced government funding had forced them to cut services that saved lives. One victim who made a particularly strong impression on Maya was Maria Santos, a single mother whose small business had been destroyed when Richard's shell companies defaulted on loans that had been backed by government guarantees. Maria had lost her house, her car, and her children's college funds because of Richard's fraudulent activities. When Maria finished her testimony, she looked directly at Maya in the gallery and mouthed the words, "Thank you for having the courage to expose the man who had ruined her life." As the trial neared its conclusion, Maya reflected on how much her life had changed since that October morning when she first overheard Richard discussing illegal activities. She was no longer working as a maid, instead receiving a modest salary from the FBI's Witness Protection Program, while she testified in various legal proceedings related to Richard's crimes. Marcus had transferred to a different college under a new identity to protect him from potential retaliation, and Maya missed seeing her brother every day. Maya had also become something of a celebrity, receiving interview requests from reporters and speaking invitations from organizations that supported whistleblowers and workers' rights. She had been featured on the cover of several magazines as an example of ordinary people standing up against powerful criminals. While Maya appreciated the recognition, she sometimes missed the anonymity of her former life and wondered if she would ever be able to live quietly again. The trial lasted 6 weeks, and when it finally went to the jury, Maya felt both relief and anxiety about the verdict. She had done everything she could to seek justice for Richard Wellington's victims, but she knew that wealthy defendants sometimes escaped conviction despite overwhelming evidence. Maya spent the 3 days of jury deliberation in her safe-house apartment, unable to concentrate on anything except the 12 people who would decide whether her courage and sacrifice had been worthwhile. The jury returned their verdict on a sunny Friday afternoon in late spring. Maya sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery, flanked by Agent Chen and Prosecutor Janet Morrison, as the 12 jurors filed back into their seats. The foreman stood up when asked by the judge, holding a piece of paper that contained the decision that would determine whether Maya's year of sacrifice had resulted in justice or disappointment. On the first count of tax evasion, the jury found Richard Wellington guilty. On the second count of money laundering, guilty. On the third count of fraud, guilty. Maya listened as the foreman read guilty verdicts on all 23 counts, her eyes filling with tears of relief and vindication. Behind her she could hear Patricia Wellington sobbing quietly as she watched her husband's fate being sealed by 12 ordinary citizens who had seen through his expensive lawyers and lies. Richard Wellington showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, sitting perfectly still in his $1,000 suit while his entire world collapsed around him. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing was scheduled, Richard stood up and for the first time in the trial looked directly at Maya. For a moment, Maya thought he might apologize or show some remorse for the pain he had caused to so many people. Instead, Richard simply said that he would appeal the verdict and maintained his innocence of all charges. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, and Maya left the courthouse surrounded by reporters shouting questions about how she felt about the verdict. Maya made a brief statement thanking the FBI and the prosecutors for their hard work, and expressing hope that the conviction would provide some measure of justice for Richard Wellington's victims. She did not mention her own sacrifice or the personal cost of her decision to come forward, focusing instead on the importance of holding powerful criminals accountable for their actions. At the sentencing hearing, Maya listened as Judge Patricia Kim delivered a scathing assessment of Richard Wellington's crimes and their impact on innocent victims. Judge Kim noted that Richard had shown no remorse for his actions and had attempted to intimidate the key witness in his case through violence and threats. The judge sentenced Richard Wellington to 45 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $2.8 billion in restitution to his victims. Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched Richard Wellington being led away in handcuffs to begin his prison sentence. The man who had dragged her across the floor by her hair and threatened to kill her brother would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to hurt anyone else. Maya thought about her mother, who had always taught her that justice might be slow, but it was inevitable for those who stood up for what was right. In the months following Richard's sentencing, Maya began to rebuild her life in ways she had never imagined possible. She used the reward money from the government's whistleblower program to start a foundation that provided legal assistance to domestic workers who witnessed crimes in their workplaces. Maya had learned that many maids, nannies, and housekeepers saw illegal activities but were afraid to report them because of their vulnerable employment status. Maya's foundation also provided scholarships for the children of domestic workers, helping young people like Marcus pursue higher education despite their family's limited financial resources. Maya named the foundation after her mother, honoring the woman who had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to do what was right despite being afraid. Marcus graduated from college with highest honors and immediately joined Maya's foundation as its director of education programs. The threats against Marcus had brought brother and sister closer together, and they worked as a team to help other families facing similar challenges. Marcus often spoke at high schools and colleges about the importance of integrity and standing up against injustice, sharing his sister's story as an example of how one person's courage could change the world. Agent Chen became one of Maya's closest friends, and they often had dinner together to discuss the foundation's work and Maya's adjustment to her new life. Agent Chen told Maya that she had inspired many other FBI witnesses to come forward with information about powerful criminals, knowing that the Bureau would protect them and take their testimony seriously. Maya's case had become a model for how to successfully prosecute wealthy defendants who thought they were above the law. Maya was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and government hearings about whistleblower protection and workers' rights. She traveled around the country telling her story and encouraging other people to speak up when they witnessed wrongdoing. Maya always emphasized that she was not naturally brave, but that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they decided that justice was more important than personal safety. 2 years after Richard Wellington's conviction, Maya received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Maria Santos, the single mother whose business had been destroyed by Richard's crimes. Maria wrote that she had used the restitution money from Richard's conviction to start a new business, and that she was finally able to send her children to college. Maria thanked Maya for having the courage to expose Richard Wellington, saying that Maya's bravery had given her family a second chance at the American dream. Maya kept Maria's letter framed on her desk as a reminder of why she had risked everything to stand up against Richard Wellington. The letter represented all the victims whose lives had been improved because Maya had chosen to speak one word, recorded, instead of staying silent in the face of injustice. Maya knew that her decision to become a whistleblower had changed not only her own life, but the lives of thousands of people who had been hurt by Richard's crimes. On quiet evenings in her new apartment, Maya sometimes thought about what her life might have been like if she had never overheard those conversations in Richard Wellington's study. She might still be working as a maid, invisible and anonymous, earning just enough money to help Marcus through school, while remaining unaware of the massive crimes happening around her. Maya realized that ignorance might have been easier, but it would never have been better. Maya had learned that the word justice was not just an abstract concept, but something that required real people to take real risks to make it happen. She had discovered that courage was not something people were born with, but something they chose when faced with moments that defined their character. Maya Johnson had started as a maid who cleaned a billionaire's house, but she had become something much more important, a woman who proved that no one is too powerful to be held accountable when someone brave enough stands up and speaks the truth. The mansion where Maya had once worked as an invisible servant was now owned by the government and had been converted into a community center that provided job training and legal services to low-income families. Maya sometimes drove past the building, remembering the frightened woman she had been when she first walked through those gates. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more purposeful. Someone who knew that a single word spoken at the right moment could change everything. Maya's story became a symbol of hope for working people everywhere, proof that wealth and power could not protect criminals from the consequences of their actions when ordinary citizens had the courage to demand justice. The word Maya had spoken in Richard Wellington's study, recorded, had echoed far beyond that marble-floored mansion, inspiring a movement of people who refused to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Maya Johnson had uttered one word that brought justice, and in doing so, she had discovered that the most powerful weapon against corruption was not money or influence, but the simple decision of one person to stand up and tell the truth.